Hey, this is Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to inspect and replace the clutch plates on your KTM 690 or Husqvarna 701. This 701 is in here because the clutch is slipping. Now, what happens is we'll go to accelerate hard, we'll give it gas, and the engine RPM increases, but the speed of the bike doesn't. So we know we need to get these clutch plates swapped out, and if your clutch plates are slipping, you want to get them changed out as soon as you can because the problem can compound quickly and eventually burn up those plates. So we've got a clutch kit we're going to put in this. It's got the clutch plates and the springs. That's going to take care of our problem. Now this bike we're working on, it's a 2017 Husqvarna 701 Enduro, but the procedure that we're showing you today will work for other 701 models from Husky, as well as KTM models with the 690 LC4 engine. So let's go ahead and get these clutch plates changed out. To do this job, we'll need some common hand tools. We've got the Bike Master torque wrench, a couple picks, and we'll also need a set of digital calipers. We've got some gasket scrapers, and then Husqvarna wants us to use a special tool to help remove this clutch, but we're actually going to use some 5mm diameter bolts by 35mm long. And then we're also using these snap ring pliers to help remove some oil filters. We'll need some rags, rubber gloves, and safety glasses. Now, if your clutch was slipping, chances are that you have some friction material in your oil, and it's a good idea to get that changed out. So on our website, we have a few different options for oil change kits. Right here, we're showing the oil filter service kit. This one's from Husqvarna, but what we're going to use is the Tusk oil change kit. Now this comes with the 2 oil filters, your crush washer, and your choice of oil. Now alongside with that, we actually got under the OEM diagram and we got a clutch cover gasket, and then some of these O-rings we're going to be using while we do the oil change. And these are just oil filter covers and some of the O-rings for the oil screens. Now for the clutch kit, we're using the clutch kit from Husqvarna, and this comes with the steels, fibers, and clutch springs. You'll also need a drain pan, funnel, and we've got some contact cleaner to help clean things up. As you go through this process, you'll want to refer to your model-specific service manual for more information, proper procedures, and specs. Now before we begin any work on the bike, it's a good idea to soak your friction plates in oil. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put all the plates in this Ziploc bag. That's going to keep everything clean, and then I'm going to dump some fresh oil onto them and let them soak while we're taking everything apart. All right, so you want to start out with a clean bike, and the next thing you'll do is if you have a skid plate, you'll need to remove it. And before we remove these drain plugs, we do want to warm up the engine oil a little bit by running the bike for a minute. And then we're going to remove the drain plug, the 2 bolts for the oil screens, remove those out. And then we'll also remove the 2 oil filters. Now since we have an oil line here going to this filter cover, I'm going to swing this up out of the way so we can get that clutch cover off easy, and I'm just going to hold it in place with a zip tie. The next thing we'll do is clean all of the sealing surfaces. We'll spray off the oil screens, make sure there's no contaminants on them. Then we're going to reinstall new O-rings on everything, a new crush washer, and we'll start going back together with everything except for the right side oil filter. So this left side is going to be the longer oil filter. And we'll torque these screen caps to 11.1 foot-pounds. The drain bolt is going to be at 14.8 foot-pounds. To gain access to the clutch cover, we're going to need to remove this foot peg assembly. So for us, we have an accessory bolted to ours. We've got a pannier rack. So we're just going to remove those 2 bolts. And then we've got 3 bolts holding the foot peg assembly on. Once we remove those, it's a good idea to support the foot peg assembly with either a bungee cord or a tie, and that way you don't have all the weight of the assembly pulling on that brake line. After that, we'll remove all of these 8mm head bolts all the way around this clutch cover, and I'm just going to do it in a crisscross pattern and remove the cover. Now a couple of these bolts are different sizes, so pay attention when you're taking everything out. I want to point out, make sure that you keep track of these 2 dowel pins. All right, now that we have the clutch cover off, this is where you're either going to need a special tool, or what we did, we got these 5mm diameter by 35mm long bolts, and it's a 0.8 thread pitch, and they just have the Allen key for the top. We're going to put these in the 4 bolt holes in this clutch, and we need to do this to take this plate off of the pressure plate. So they call this piece right here the pressure cap. To remove it, we'll remove these 4 bolts in a crisscross pattern. And we're just going to remove them evenly. So when we take this out, I'm just going to rotate this bearing right here and make sure it rotates freely and that there's no side-to-side play in it. And this one's feeling pretty good. So at this point, normally you just remove a pressure plate and pull the plates out, but this one's a little different. We're actually going to remove this throw out and the push rod, and then we actually have to remove this hub nut. So to do that, we're going to bend the tabs over on this washer. All right, so with the tabs bent over, we can now use a gear jammer. This gear jammer we have, this one's from Motion Pro, and we're just going to put this and jam these primary drive gears down here, and then that way we can remove this nut. And what's nice, this tool has that magnet, so it just holds it into place while you're doing your work. And right here, this one is a 30mm nut. All right, so now we'll remove this washer. We're actually going to remove this clutch pack right here, and we're just removing everything as an assembly. Now, keep in mind, you've got some washers back here, so if they come off, make sure they stay into place. I'm going to pull this off and just keep everything all together, and that way I know I'm going back together correctly. We pulled this gasket off, and if you have any gasket on there, you want to scrape it off, and then also I'm going to use some contact cleaner and a rag to wipe up that surface. And then we're going to take this over to the bench and disassemble and inspect everything there. All right, before we take everything apart, pay attention to this mark on the pressure plate. That's going to index the pressure plate to the hub. If I turn this up, you can see that we have one friction disc that's offset from the rest. Pretty much what we're going to do, we're going to remove this pressure plate and hub assembly with the clutch pack. We've got this washer on the back side. Make sure you pay attention how that goes. You can see that it's stepped. You're going to have a split washer that sits in there. So we'll show you how to get that back together a little later on. But we're just going to set this aside for now. And then we also have this bearing. You want to inspect these needles, make sure there's no flat spots and that the cage isn't cracked or damaged. This one's looking pretty good. And then on this basket, we're actually going to look at these fingers coming out. You want to make sure that there's no deep grooves right here. Now ours, you can see some little bit of marking, but if I run my fingernail across, I can't even feel them. So we know this basket's good. The other thing you can look at on this back side, make sure the gear is tight to the basket. If there's any play, you're going to have to replace the assembly. All right, let's check out our clutch pack and see what was going on in here. So on this, I'm going to remove these bolts just a little bit at a time because, again, this is a unique clutch, and we actually have 4 more springs in here for this pressure plate. All right, now I'm going to remove these 4 bolts. To get the pressure plate and clutch pack off, I'm actually going to start with this last fiber disc. I'm going to lift up on it, and I'll flip this upside down. At this point, I'm going to take these 4 springs out, set them aside, and then I want to look at these plates. This outer plate doesn't look bad. All right, so this steel plate is not looking good though. This thing is super dark, it's blued, and these steel plates are going to be warped. So as I've been going through these friction discs, they've been looking pretty bad. This one isn't quite as bad as some of them. If you're not sure if they're bad or not, if everything doesn't look glazed, you can actually take a measurement on this. The minimum thickness for this should be 2.5 millimeters. All right, so last, this friction disc that sits against the pressure plate, it's going to have a larger inside diameter. Just take note of that. And then we actually have a judder spring and a flat washer. The concave part of this, it's almost like a dish when you're going back together. So the dish part goes down. So we'll set that right there just so we remember. And then this one behind it is just a flat washer. And then the other things we need to do are inspect this pressure plate surface, make sure that it's smooth and there's no damage to it or grooves. And same thing on this other half on this hub. You want to make sure there's no grooving and that it's perfectly smooth. Now the last thing on the clutch hub, we need to check for any grooving where the steel plates ride on the center hub. And if there's anything really deep or that your fingernail really catches on, you're going to want to replace it. If you're not sure why your clutch was slipping and the clutch plates all look okay, you want to check these clutch springs. These springs should be 31.5 to 33.5 millimeters. Now that we've inspected everything, we'll go ahead, we'll clean up all our parts with some contact cleaner, and we're going to remove this gasket from the clutch cover, clean it up, and then we'll be ready for reassembly. All right, so you'll notice on this clutch cover you have an oil passageway right here, and when you're cleaning everything, it's really important. You don't want to get any gasket material or any cleaning contact cleaner down in there. Now that we have our parts clean, we're ready for reassembly. I do want to point out again, these arrows right here, these are the index marks that need to be lined up. And if I flip this over, this has a notch in that same spot where the arrow is. So we'll line this arrow with that notch. So now I'm going to flip this pressure plate over and I'm going to start building the clutch pack. So first thing, I have this flat washer. I'm putting a little bit of oil on it. And I'll set that into place. Now we're going to apply some oil to this concave washer and we're going to install it so the convex part of it is facing down towards the pressure plate. Just to clarify, you'll want to install the judder spring, which is number 2 in the picture in your manual, so that the convex side, letter A, is against the washer, number 1. Next we have larger inside diameter friction disc. Now from this point going forward, we're going to alternate steel plates and friction discs. Now these steel plates have a square edge, and then on the other side they have a rounded edge. So I'm going to have the square edge facing up on these. It doesn't really matter which way you have them face, you just want all of them facing the same way. Next thing we'll do is reinstall the springs onto the clutch hub, and then we're going to put the pressure plate with the clutch pack onto the hub. So with the springs in place, I'm going to hold on to this last plate. So again, we've got our indexing mark right here, and then behind that spring we have the indexing mark on the hub. When I put this together, I've got these splines. They're going to line up with the hub, and you want to make sure this arrow and that mark line up in the end. And then these springs, they sit down into the pressure plate. I'm just kind of poking them into place. All right, so everything's set into place. I've got my indexing marks lined up. Now, I don't want this clutch pack to come apart. We've got a little bit of gap right here, and we want to make sure all the stills stay on their splines. So what I'm going to do now is press down on this, and that way I'm not going to have any alignment issues. And then I'm going to start installing these bolts. All right, now that I have 2 of the bolts started, I'm going to look down in here and make sure that our steel plate is still on its splines, which it is. Now I'll flip that back over and I'll install these other 2 bolts. And we're just going to loosely install these just till they bottom out, and we're doing it in a crisscross pattern. And we want to have them just loose enough so we can move the friction discs. Now before we install this into the clutch basket, just keep in mind that this top friction disc is going to have to be rotated 1 tooth. It's going to be offset from the rest of the discs. All right, back at the bike, I'm going to install this washer first. Now I'm going to apply some oil to this needle bearing and slide that into place. All right, next we'll put the clutch basket on, and just to be safe, I'm going to put a little oil where that needle bearing rides. We'll slide this into place. Now keep in mind we have 2 gears we're lining up, so we might have to rotate the basket, and with this oil pump gear you might have to turn it to get this basket all the way on. All right, now that the clutch basket is seated all the way down, we've got these half washers we need to put into place, and to help hold them in place I'm going to put a little grease on them. And they have a sharp edge and they have a rounded edge, so the sharp edge needs to face outward. Now we can put this stepped washer into place. The step side is going to be facing that split washer, and it's going to cover it and keep everything in place. All right, at this point we can put our clutch pack into place. So to do that, I've got all the friction discs lined up except for this outer one. We're just going to gently work this into place, and keep in mind we're going to have to line up the splines right here. All right, we're all lined up. What we want to do now, we're going to put our new washer on the back side of this. It's actually a superseded washer. We're going to clean the threads on this shaft, and we're also going to clean the threads on the nut and make sure there's no oil on them. But we're going to run some Loctite with that, and it's going to be medium strength thread lock. All right, so we'll set our gear jammer into place, and then since we left these screws just a little loose, I'm going to lightly bottom them out. That's going to put a little bit of tension on these new clutch plates. And then we're going to torque this to 100 Newton meters or 73.8 foot-pounds. All right, we'll remove the gear jammer. All right, so at this point, I'm putting a little bit of oil on the ends of this push rod, and we'll put this down into place. And we've got this throwout right here. I'm just putting a little oil on that too. Set that there. And I'm going to take some fresh oil, put a little bit on this new bearing right here. Take your new springs, install all of those. And then these bolts that hold the springs down, we're going to tighten them in a crisscross pattern. And we're going to do that in a couple different steps. Now we can torque these bolts down to 4.4 foot-pounds. All right, after that, we'll remove our special tool for these forward bolts with the Allen head. Next, we'll install the clutch cover gasket into place. Make sure we have our 2 dowel pins in their spots. And I just went ahead, I put a little grease on both sides of this gasket, and that's just going to help keep it in place while I install it. Now to keep the cover in place while I install all the other bolts, I'm just going to loosely install 2 of them, and then I'll put the rest into place. And now we'll tighten everything in a crisscross pattern. We'll torque them down to 7.4 foot-pounds. All right, now we'll cut the zip tie holding the oil line up. We'll reinstall the oil filter, install the foot peg, and for us, the pannier rack and any other accessories you might have. Then we'll top the machine off with oil. Last, we'll run the bike for a minute, check our oil level, then reinstall the skid plate. All right, that's it for replacing the clutch plates on your 701 or 690. If you need any of the parts we used today, check out our website. We have both OEM and aftermarket parts on there. And subscribe to our YouTube channel for more helpful content. Thanks for watching.